The Battlehosts. Be a better gamer, build a better community.
Welcome to Battlehosts, a podcast website dedicated to helping you become a better 40K gamer and to build a better community of players. I'm your host, Mark, and with me tonight is Sean.
Hello.
And Matt.
Hello.
If you like what you hear, subscribe to us on iTunes to catch all the latest episodes. You can follow us on Facebook under The Battlehosts. You can support The Battlehosts for as little as $1 a month. You can visit patreon.com/The Battlehosts. And for $3 a month, you get access to our Discord chat. Now, in this episode, we're going to talk about the movement phase. This is another in a series of podcasts that we've done on 40K tactics. So we did one on the deployment, we did one on assault, we did one on target priority. Feels like we skipped movement, but we actually waited to do movement. Movement's probably one of the more important ones, but this is our podcast on movement. So we're going to start off with the mechanics of the movement phase and talk about the different types of terrain and game states that impact movement. Then we'll talk a little bit about having a purpose for moving a unit, having a plan, thinking ahead, and some of the different unit types that are the different sort of movement rules for each unit type. And then we'll just, kind of round out about how can you practice your movement. And even if that practice means sitting by yourself with an empty table, moving your units around, I mean, that's practice. You guys have done this, right?
You keep on bringing up these kind of situations, Mark, and it makes me worry. Are you okay?
It's just maybe I haven't done it with an empty board, but what I have done is like draw it on a piece of paper before.
Yeah. Okay.
So I've done that. No, we used that before.
Have you?
I have. Yeah. I feel like I have. You know what? Perhaps I need to do it more.
Okay.
All right. So movement phase. But before we jump into the movement phase, let's hear a word from our sponsor, DGT.
Playing a tabletop game at a casual pace can be fun, but running out of time and not getting your fair share is not. Playing with a game timer is the best way to speed up your play and make sure everyone gets an equal amount of game time. Check out the Easy Game Timer from DGT. It's a perfect solution for tabletop miniature games with a large lever for quickly changing turns and clear digital readout. It's simple to set up and customize, and your settings are saved when it's turned off. It's the most affordable and high-quality game timer on the market and is officially sanctioned by the International Chess Federation. The DGT Easy Game Timer is available from many online retailers. Wholesale pricing is also available for tournament organizers. Visit dgtnorthamerica.com to learn more. Speed up your game and improve your play with the Easy Game Timer from DGT.
And we're back. All right. So we're going to talk about the movement phase. Now, the movement phase. Now, when we talked about our deployment phase, and if you haven't heard our conversation or our podcast on deployment, go back and listen to it because deployment happens obviously just before movement.
Yes.
It's really important to deploy correctly. I think we said that you don't necessarily win in the deployment phase, but you can lose in the deployment phase.
Yep.
Yeah. So you can lose a game by completely screwing up your deployment. So we're going to assume, though, that you have deployed correctly, and then now we're kicking off the movement phase. And a lot of players will just say, is the movement phase is the most important phase.
Yes.
And why? What do you think, Sean? What are your thoughts behind saying the movement phase is most important? Why is it most important?
Well, I mean, if I think about it, there are not as many games where I get done with the game and I go, man, I lost that game because I shot at the wrong unit. Or I lost that game because, picking the wrong secondaries does happen. Yeah. But there are a lot of games where I look at it and I go, that specific movement or not moving that unit or moving that movement, not using that movement correctly lost me that game.
Yeah.
And you can identify it, and it's one of those things that when it bites you, it really bites you.
Yeah.
And the big thing about movement is it impacts everything else.
Yeah.
Right? Even if you're a shooting army, well, where are you moving to deny line of sight or get line of sight, deny cover, get cover? Are you going to get into threat range? And then against enemy armies, are you moving out of their threat ranges? Are you avoiding their big things?
Yeah.
So it is one of those foundational pieces that impacts the entire game.
Yeah. And I mean, when I first starting to learn the game, it's really weird, especially when you come from like a board game, is that you have so much freedom with movement. 40K it's tape measures. You're moving things with tape measures. And I remember just taking a long time just to adjust to the idea of I can take this piece and move it wherever I want within this range of this tape measure.
Yeah.
It's just, it is a strange concept when you first start, when you're so used to having a grid system where you're moving units around. So you have complete freedom and you also have control. The only real random element is just advance rolls. Like, that's it.
Yep.
That's
Pretty
it.
much. Yep.
And even then you can sometimes you can use things to mitigate that, or you can do a reroll. And honestly, 6 inches on an advanced roll is almost like, oh, I mean, if you're relying on having an advanced roll, unless it's the end of the game, then there's probably there might be something wrong there.
A lot of the things that you want to advance have an auto advance anyway.
Yeah.
Flyers have an auto 20 advance for the most part.
Bikes
Bikes have an auto advance. Jet bikes, things like that. Movement phase is probably the most important phase of the game. I would argue that it's right up there. I would say assault is probably the more important because you can more directly affect opponents' actions with a well-played assault phase.
Yeah.
Of course, that well-played assault phase requires some movement.
Yeah.
Yep.
You moving specific models in the right direction to either tag or lock in or trap other things, but movement is extremely important.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. Now, the thing is that we talk about games are won and lost. I think you're right, Sean. The games are lost in the movement phase. And it's not even the phase itself. It's not even like I made a movement that one turn. It's that I should have been moving this unit 2 turns ago.
Yep.
Or it's really sucky when you're halfway through a game and you go, ooh, I am way, way out of position with this unit. What was I thinking moving them around? At some point, the movement will bite you when you start to go wrong, and usually it's a couple turns back. Sometimes you don't even see it in the moment. You're just moving things around.
Yeah, something that Mike said to me yesterday after we got done with the game. It was a somewhat close game, and he said, I feel like your movement was pretty good, except turn 1 you didn't have a plan. Turn 2 you had a plan, but not having a plan turn 1 is like you had some unmotivated movement with 2 specific units. And it was like a difference of 2 inches.
Yeah.
If I had moved 2 inches differently, he wouldn't have been able to tie me up with aberrants and really just core out part of my list.
Yeah.
And it was just unmotivated movement.
That's interesting. What does he think it means by unmotivated? Meaning you have a plan, stick to it and go for it, not just kind of half.
Yeah, like unmotivated movement is like, I should be moving this unit, so I guess I'll put it here.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like you don't have a reason to put it there. You're not going, I'm going to move it here and then next turn I'm moving it there.
Yeah.
You're not thinking ahead that way. You're kind of like, well, I have these guardsmen. I guess I'll put them here.
Yeah.
And then I guess I'll move them here. And then like turn 2, I was like, oh, I need them to be a screen. And then I got horrible advance rolls on my move.
Yeah.
And then my move. And suddenly they were like just not far enough to block out the aberrants from where they wanted to go.
Yeah. And sometimes, like as an Eldar player, movement is because they have they typically have a lot of movement. You can get yourself out of jams with their really good movement, but it's kind of a trap in some ways because you get used to just being able to course correct really quickly on the fly because, this thing moves 12 or whatever, or flyers that move the board. You get kind of sloppy. And with guard, you have to keep moving wherever you want them to move. So,
yeah. Well, and they say in things like acting and improv, hang with me here. This connects, I swear. Okay. Say, well, how should I move in this scene? Like, well, move with a purpose, okay? It's very, very similar to 40K. Move with a purpose.
Yep.
Don't just move because, okay?
Yeah.
Because, one, that takes up your time, okay? That takes up your mental bandwidth. We already have enough stuff to move and think about. That with you wasting, 45 seconds moving this 20-man guard unit that really doesn't need to move. They need to stand on this objective and block out deep strikers. That is their job. They don't need to move. Don't move them. You know? Move the other stuff. In my little bit of a soapbox here, this is why I feel that the Castellan was so silly, is you had 604 points that sat there.
Yeah,
the Castellan didn't need to really move.
The Castellan did not move.
Yeah.
You only had to worry about moving about 1,400 or less of your army.
Yeah.
That is so much less pre-planning, thinking ahead 2 or 3 turns when you have 600 points of your army that says everything's in range here, and I destroy that, and I destroy that, and I destroy that.
Yep.
That was, in my opinion, it was the biggest advantage of the Castellan, to be honest with you. But if you don't have if there's not a clear reason to move a unit, don't.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because
I have moved. I was playing against Colin, and Colin is playing a list with a lot of. Well, he had Morty for one, and so I had my. I had some breachers. I had my knight, and I had the breachers about 2.5 inches away to prevent Morty from dropping down in there. And it was my movement phase, and I kind of shuffled some things around, but I just shuffled things around for no reason and moved just enough to leave a spot where Morty could land and punk my knight. My original intention during deployment was to make sure that knight was not going to get Morty couldn't land in and destroy him. But as I was messing around in my movement phase, I inadvertently left a spot there.
Yeah.
That is unpurposeful movement. That's just moving just for the heck of it. That's me just like, oh, I guess I'll go here. There's no reason to do any of that. I could have just left it there and it'd been just fine.
Yep.
So, when you've deployed and you have everything set up nice, then you start to move things, you have to kind of reset the state every time. You have to feel like, okay, I have moved these units into positions of having a purpose, not just like messing up this beautiful deployment that you spent all this time creating. So, all right, let's talk about the mechanics of movement real quick. I think one of the things that drives a lot of people crazy, and I think when I first started, I was much better at it, and I've gotten kind of sloppy, and I'm trying to kind of force myself to be less sloppy, is being very precise with your movement. And this means using dice to measure distances. This means using a tape measure, putting a dice down, and then moving, especially if you're moving long distances. But being precise with movement, if your opponent feels that you're being kind of sloppy with movement, that's the first key that they're going to start looking and questioning some of the things that you're doing.
Yep.
So,
and it's a hard conversation for them to start if they feel like you're doing that, because it's a hard thing to call somebody on.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we've all been in that situation where we're watching somebody move their orcs and we're like, that orc boy just moved like 13 inches.
Yeah.
Right? Like, but it's hard to be like, hey man, you measured that wrong, and have them, I mean, honestly, you can start that conversation pretty easily, but in a tournament setting, you're not necessarily going to want to say that. And if you're the one making the mistake, they're going to have a hard time, bring that up and not having it sound accusatory. Just be careful.
Yeah.
And if you're the opponent and they're moving a big unit, help them out.
Yeah.
Put your finger where they've measured. Hey, this is where you're going. That kind of stuff can really help.
Yeah.
Just marking that kind of stuff.
It's a tricky one to tread upon. You can casually ask, like, "Oh, how far do they move?"
Yeah,
like that to kind of flag to them, like, "I want to check that one more time." I know, like we're all friends here, and we all want a good game, but measuring accurately is probably the best way to get on somebody's good side when you are meeting them for the first time.
Yep.
Because if you're just kind of throwing things, like I've played orc players that just. They don't move their boys. They just grab them into like a big ball and just drop them in a pile.
Yeah.
Like, I know how this one's going.
Exactly.
They just don't care.
Yeah. Even if you're moving 30 boys or 30 infantry or 20 infantry, you still, you take the top, the closest model, you dice it, you move him to wherever that is, and then you fill in behind, but you still have to be, you still have to be very careful about keeping the same sort of spread of models when you move forward. So you can't just shove them all forward to whatever that
because then that back boy probably moved a little bit too far.
A little too fast.
You do that.
And we're picking on orc players, but any unit that has a ton of bodies, Tyranid players, anything really, guard, whatever. Watching unit coherency, it's really easy to get sloppy with coherency. Sometimes it's also easy to be very... gamey is not the right word, but you tend to want, especially if you're trying to spread your units out to kind of fan them out in the line. Sometimes that in the coherency gets to be about 3 inches and then 4 inches. Sometimes you have to watch, and even top players will do this because they're trying to increase their board space, to deny deep strikers, and their screen becomes stretched to the point where it's way past unit coherency.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's easy to call. I mean,
that one's an easy one.
Yeah,
like, hey, is that guy in coherency?
Yeah.
That's super easy.
Yeah.
And they have quick measures for that now that you just
Yep.
But unit coherency is something that does not get called out a lot on.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of one of those things that you see it and like, is there a relative way that he could shuffle those around to stay within coherency and still block that out? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, whatever.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm just going to let it. Now, if they're like trying to like daisy chain all the way up the board or something like that, like there's no way you'd be able to do that. If you were to stick to a coherency, that's where you kind of have a little bit of a discussion. But
yeah. Usually you see it a lot. not a lot, but you have seen it. I've seen it anyway on streamed games because they're under a time limit. And you're right. Maybe there's a couple that are not quite the 2 inches, but some of them are a little more like 1. They could move them to be coherent. They're just doing it for time purposes. It's just when it becomes a point where you're thinking, okay, that's excessive. Making turns with creatures or vehicles. This is knights, especially with knights. And this I have been... Mr. Trader A has mentioned this to me. As a knight player, it's really easy to kind of cut corners.
Yes.
And knights can't cut corners. They have to go around buildings. And so you have to measure up and turn. You can't just cut a corner. Yeah. Especially during assault moves, for example. But it's really easy to get sloppy with knights. And so with knights, I think 12 inches is pretty far. Yeah. And you have to be like, okay, I'm moving up and then I'm moving over, not just cutting this corner and here I am.
Yeah. And that's one of those things where you'll see a lot of players will measure the inside corner of that knight. And so let's say it's turning right. So its base is going to swing clockwise. Yeah. Right. Well, that left side of the knight, if it's moving forward and then to the right, is going to move farther than the right side of the knight. So if you're measuring the right side of the knight, you're adding extra movement to the other side. Yep. So make sure that you're accounting for that. That's something that I'll bring up with my opponents. You don't, again, that's not aggressive. You just go, hey, you're going around bases, make sure to include that movement or something like that.
Yeah. And I think it's just better to, I've bent the tape measure. I just don't know if that's useful. It's almost like, okay, I move up 3 and then I move down this, whatever. So you're kind of doing a step movement. Yep. You might lose a little bit of distance. But your opponent will appreciate that. Flyers. And flyers basically are notoriously sloppy for movement, and craft rolled flyers, because they can pivot twice, sometimes kind of get away with a little bit of it. But flyers, it's hard to blame the player when a flyer moves like 40 inches across the board. It's really difficult to. You kind of have to hold this tape measure, have your opponent hold it all the way, kind of angle it in the right way, put a dice down, and then move the thing, because there's just no other way to do it in a real precise way.
So sloppiness with flyers comes, in my experience, it comes from the rotation. Yeah. Some people like, well, you can pivot 90 degrees. They look more like 110 to me type thing. And I have been guilty of this. Sure. I've been guilty. I mean, funny story is when I used like a non-Eldar flyer for the first time in a long time, and when I ended my movement, I pivoted at 90 degrees. My opponent was like, "Did you just pivot that non-Eldar flyer 90 degrees after you ended moving?" Like, whoops. Whoopsie. What, you guys don't get to do that?
So that's another instance of an Eldar unit providing giving you bad habits, because it's yeah. And when you're not using craft rolled flyers, it's really easy to screw up your movement.
Yes,
so,
it is.
We think we talked about the Void Raven bomber. It flies over and can do some bombs, but it can be in a position where it's really easy just to die, because it's going to go off the board, or it's going to go, or you put a spot where you can't land.
Everything we're talking about pre-planning, even more important for flyers, not Eldar flyers, but flyers, because it's going to die if you don't plan ahead. Yep. Just straight up.
And even Imperium flyers that can hover, you don't really want to be hovering. No. You don't really want to be hovering.
It's not a good feeling to be like, well, I have to pop it into hover, because otherwise I fall off the board. Okay.
That takes away their hard to hit, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so then they can just they can get assaulted. So they lose all that. All right, so let's talk about the terrain limitations on movement. Now, we have mentioned before that this edition, the terrain rules probably need a little bit more, but what we have, they really do. But let's go through the terrain rules as they have kind of defined them. Unlike past editions, the terrain doesn't slow down movement anymore, which I think is awesome, because it was always really clunky to dangerous terrain or difficult terrain or all that kind of stuff. So now there's so much more movement in this edition of 40K. You have impassable terrain, and impassable terrain means just that. And you have to be very impassable terrain means even a knight can't go over it, right? It's not a hill, it's impassable. Yes. And so what are some examples of impassable terrain that we've...
that will vary from game to game.
Yeah.
Now,
talk with your opponent about it.
Yeah. This is really important. This is really important.
I mean, it is something that gets kind of glazed over a lot, is talking about terrain, even though it's in the mission packet, usually. Yes. Looking at terrain and defining it, because there are certain things that, like, do we really want to have an argument on if this guy right here can straddle on this pillar right here? I'm like, no. Well, let's call it impassable.
Yeah.
Okay. Unless you have fly.
Yeah.
You know, let's just make it easier and make it so that you can't go on it or you can't deep strike onto it.
Yeah.
Because there are, if you don't have that conversation, 9 times out of 10 there will be a situation where, well, I'm going over this hill right here and I'm going to charge this. Well, my last game we played on a table like this and we said this type of thing here was impassable.
Yeah.
So that's what I kept in mind when I was deploying. Like, well, crap.
Yeah.
This is on me because we didn't talk about terrain before the game.
Exactly.
So rock walls I've seen as being impassable. Brick walls I've seen as being impassable. I've seen people make the Necron pylons impassable.
The Necron table from Frontline Gaming is classic for... I've seen them both. Yeah, because I've seen them as a hill or impassable. Because you can set a 5-man Ranger squad or whatever on top of those Necron pylons.
Or in theory, I guess you could kind of go into them. I guess because they do.
I do know that that did happen at one point.
I know that can happen from time to time. That you can just sneak into those
somewhere far off in the distance. I hear 17 hellhounds screaming in rage.
We're not going to explain that joke.
No.
Let's let that one go.
But talking about sloppy terrain, even talking about terrain, make sure that you're clear. Yesterday, Mike and I were playing, and we were playing on a Tau table that had these big pillar-looking things. I mean, we can't take the top off these things for ease of use. We both agreed, let's make it impassable. Well, I went to go land on... Well, I didn't even actually go to land on top of them. After one of my movement phases, we were talking about what I could have done better because it was a scrim. And I said, I suppose I could have landed Samael over there. And he said, well, I thought we said that was impassable, right? Yeah. And so it's not just that it was... When I said impassable, I was thinking, can't go into it.
Yeah.
Can't go through it.
Yeah.
When he heard impassable, he's thinking can't interact with it. Got to go around it.
Yeah.
Right? And so make sure that you're being clear.
Yeah. Even the idea of impassable is, can I land something on top of this thing? Because a unit with fly can move over impassable terrain. It can just basically move through impassable terrain because the theory is it goes all the way up and over and you don't have to measure vertical distance with a fly unit.
Yeah.
But for every other unit, it can't pass through that. It can't. It has to go around it. But also, can it land on top of it? And I think that's a different thing too. So those Necron tables are the terrain, for example.
Yeah. Now, some of the more hardened tournaments out there that aren't ginormous, aren't up to like 600 people. A lot of them will have terrain cards. They'll have little cards on the table that take away that discussion. For you. So the Tau table that think that Sean is maybe talking about. There are these like rock walls that kind of match up with the Tau towers, and there's a little crease that you can see in between those two. And the terrain card says, you just can't see through that crease. You can't draw a line of sight there. And it says this is counted as impassable. This is a crate. This is a ruin. Things like that, and it just removes that variable.
Now ruins. Let's talk about the ruins too. Is that infantry can pass through walls in a ruin, and that's the thing about infantry is assuming it's not impassable, but if it's a building or a ruin, infantry can just move through it. They don't have to go through the door. They just go through it. They just pass through it as if it's not there. You assume that there's basically the way they have the description is they'll find a way to get through the building or the wall or
breaching
something
charges,
like that.
They have breacher charges.
Doors.
Something, other units actually, like vehicles, monsters, and bikes without fly can only end up on the ground floor, and they can't go through these things. So a knight, for example, is a vehicle. It doesn't have fly, thankfully. It has to go around. It can't go through the ruin. So ruins are, for infantry, short of impassable terrain, infantry have the range of the board. They can go anywhere they want, which is the benefit of infantry in this edition, for sure.
And ruins are the most common terrain type you will see.
It just is.
They show up a lot.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons why the infantry keyword is one of the best keywords in the game.
Yeah.
Because they can make full use of ruins.
The Cataphren Breachers, those little tracked guys, are infantry troops. And every time I tell somebody they're infantry, they're infantry. These big tracked guys are infantry.
They just Kool-Aid Man through the wall.
I guess they just do.
Clank, 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 clank.
They just go right through it. But vehicles with fly... or bikes with fly, you can actually go into a ruin because it ignores the vertical terrain, and it can end up on the second floor. So they don't have the limitations of interacting with ruins.
As long as you fit between the floors, you're good to go.
As long as you can fit, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Now,
there are caveats to this. There are arguments to this that can be made left, right, and center. Some say that you can only really go into a building if there's like a hole in the top. Yeah. There's a way that they can actively go through because they cannot go through a wall.
No.
Right?
No, they have to be able to go through. There has to be a space for them to go in.
Yes. Ask your local tournament organizer.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that's what like an enclosed building is. Let's go to the next round up. A ruin usually has empty sides, so you kind of okay. But an enclosed building is it literally just that, an enclosed building, and there may or may not be spaces to go into it. But if there's like a little hole in the roof, then I think the argument is if a model can physically fit through that hole, then technically they should be allowed to go in it. Yeah. If it's a bike with fly or a vehicle with fly, if it can fit through that hole.
Yeah.
But if it can't, then no.
Because the level of ridiculousness of this can, I've seen tournaments that have allowed wave serpents to go into those 4-sided enclosed buildings.
Yeah.
And they fit in the floors because wave serpents are low riders, right? I mean, they are pretty low to the ground. I mean, they don't like to go over speed bumps very much because they scratch up the undercarriage and everything, but they're really low and they can fit in each one of those floors. You could fit 2 wave serpents inside that building. On each floor of the building if you wanted to. And it'd look at that and be like, guys, really?
That's a good point. I mean, because the lip of a ruin or a building for that matter is usually fairly thin.
Yes.
And wave serpents are the classic example. They're a vehicle or a custodes tank. Mm-hmm. Can it sit on the second level? And typically it says if it fits. And if it fits is just sort of like, now they fixed Wildby model.
Yes.
But to me, I kind of think that would have to be a TO call. I would say no, just because I don't think it physically fits. Like a chunk of it can fit, but if you've got to wobbly model something, I don't know. That's a tough call. Now, I think
ask your TO.
Ask your TO now, or just work with your opponent. I mean, because most of us are not going to events. So, in enclosed building, I think the best thing I've heard is that if there is a opening that the model can fit in, then the unit can go in there if it has fly. Yeah. I think that feels safe.
So we need to denote between ruins and buildings, right? Because a building is a fortification that is purchased with points that is in somebody's army. Yes. Okay, so all of the rules that we just talked about do not apply to those things. A unit with fly cannot charge over that thing. Yeah. Okay. I mean, it can fly over and can go over it in the movement phase. Yeah. And everything, but
it is a model of your army. But
if it's a purchase model, purchase building for occasion.
Infantry cannot go through it. You know.
Yeah, so for better verbiage, these are enclosed ruins.
Yeah, we'll call them enclosed ruins. Yeah, not ruins. Buildings. Yep.
Yes. Yeah. I know it's hard. But the differentiation is there. Yes. They're two completely different things.
Yes. Yep, for sure. That's a good point. Hills, containers, barricades. Basically, you count vertical movement unless it has fly. So if even a knight that's going over a hill, even if the hill is like 1 inch up and 1 inch across, you still have to count that as vertical movement.
Yes.
So, and that's fairly simple.
Yeah. Sometimes you'll have opponents that will float the idea of like some of these. I might go, hey, cover if you're on top.
Yeah.
That's an agreement with your opponent.
Yeah.
You know, like if you guys agree on it, do it. I've played some games where we agreed on that. I've played others where we don't. Most of the time my response is, I don't know. I don't really care. Yeah. You know, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
Typically it's like if the table is really, really sparse in terms of cover, then this can be an easy way to add it.
Yeah,
but
and it's
really when it comes down to terrain, it's what you and your opponent agree on for things.
It's kind of the old, it's from a past edition when we used to have area terrain. Which was,
which does not exist in the rules, but I know. We still use it.
I really appreciated it. I liked it.
It hasn't existed since like 6th edition, I think. No. Because we still use it in 7th.
Yeah. And we still talk about it, but it's basically does this piece of terrain, which now, if it's a crater, they get cover if if an infantry unit's in it.
Yes.
But if it's a hill, you know, oftentimes people say, well, does this get cover or not? And so that's another thing you're going to have to talk about. Does this hill provide cover by being in it?
Oh, by the way, have these discussions before you decide deployment zones.
Yes.
Before you do anything else, have this discussion.
Yes, for sure. And craters and woods this is the thing I don't think a lot of people do. It's a minus 2 inch charge. It's
Nobody
a minus
remembers.
2 inch charge.
Nobody remembers.
If you have an infantry squad inside a crater or a wood, it's a minus 2 inch charge for the unit charging into it, which I don't know anyone
or through it.
Or through it.
Or out
of it. Yeah, that's true.
As long as you're touching
as long as you have to skirt the edge of it, you have to go around it. In this case, you're probably doing more anyways. So, and then there's barricades, which I don't see very much anymore, sadly. But infantry get 1 inch. If infantry within an inch get cover if behind it, and you can actually fight 2 inches away.
Yeah, that's always an interesting one.
So this is some of this. So the last couple of things we talked about are some of the terrain rules that are inside the general rulebook that most people don't use, although you probably could and use and should. But the biggest thing is really what's impassable, and then the idea behind like what can go inside if you have a enclosed ruin, and also hills. Do hills count as cover? These are the big things.
Well, and if you go by the rule book, I don't think hills provide cover. It is simply there for line of sight blocking. It can be traversed over normally.
Yep.
Doesn't provide a cover save. It is just something to duck behind.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have tables of terrain that I've made that have hills that at the time they were area terrain, and that was the whole purpose of them. Now they don't necessarily have it, so I would have, if it was we'd have to agree, or if it's an event, I might have a terrain card that says this hill is a area terrain or whatever.
Yeah, and if you're like building your own terrain and you want to indicate that it gives cover, put something on top of it, like, some
wreckage or something.
Yeah, wreckage or something to be like,
crater.
hey, look, there's something that people would be able to take cover behind on this hill. Yeah. Then your players are more likely to get the intention of, oh, okay, that's supposed to benefit my units.
Yeah. All right. So as you can see, it's so funny because you think, terrain, it's not going to be, there's a lot of gray area in the terrain, mostly because, just because. So hopefully they'll get a little more clearer, because right now the terrain rules are specific for each piece of terrain, but it becomes kind of messy, especially when you start talking about unit interactions with terrain. Now, let's talk about movement. The purpose of movement. Now, in our episode on playing to the mission, we said there's really only 2 ways to score points. One is kill something, and the other is stand somewhere.
Yes.
When you're thinking about movement and having a purpose and moving with purpose, there really is only a couple things you want to do, and it's a variation of that. You want to kill a unit, or you want to stop your opponent from killing one of your units. So you're going to move into threat range, or you're moving out of threat range. And the third is I want to stand somewhere. Or the fourth is I want to stop my opponent from standing somewhere. So before you start to move a unit, what am I doing? Am I going to move this into threat range, or am I going to move it out of threat range? Or am I going to try to stand somewhere, either this turn or next turn or subsequent turns? Or am I going to prevent my opponent from standing somewhere? Those are really the 4 kind of generic purposes of movement. What is the first question is, what am I doing? So, for example, Sean, you talked about your infantry as screens, right?
Yes.
Setting your screens up, they are preventing your opponent from standing somewhere, moving somewhere, right? You're blocking, you're move blocking at that point. But also, you want to stand somewhere because you want to claim an objective. So you're really you're basically providing 2 purposes there.
Yes.
Because your infantry aren't a threat. You're not trying to move into like rapid fire range. I mean, it's great if you do.
Respect first rank, second rank.
But, that's fair. Eventually they do get there, but at the same time, that's not your primary reason for moving them. So, but also you have, you're still running Leviathan Dreads, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So the Leviathan Dreads, you're trying to move into threat range.
Yeah.
Is he still running Leviathans?
You are a fan of Leviathans.
I actually have like 8 lists right now that I'm considering that don't have one in it.
Really?
So, yeah.
Compared to the 30 that do have them.
I had to clear my battle scribe, so I had to write a new list to use the Leviathan yesterday.
You know what? I wish I could do that. I wish Battlescribe had like a delete all.
Yeah, I had it. Took so long. Anyways.
But I'm just saying is like that would be nice because it's it's a fresh start.
Yeah. Yeah, it was actually pretty fun.
Okay.
To get rid of all the baggage.
All right. It's the Marie Kondo of cleaning stuff up.
Are you saying it's a Leviathan amount of baggage?
Wow.
Yeah.
Happy Father's Day, everybody.
It's a dad's joke on a dad's day.
So, yes, though, the Leviathan, a turn that an alpha unit with a lot of firepower isn't shooting is a turn wasted. And Leviathan has 24 inches?
Yeah. So it's a 32-inch threat.
Yeah.
So that gives me a bubble that I'm always identifying, okay, where am I moving to get range on typically multiple units?
Yeah.
Or just the one unit if I'm unloading into Morty or a massive squad or something. And then also I have a secondary threat range of my heavy flamers.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I have a 16-inch threat on my heavy flamers. Where can I move to pick up those?
Yeah.
Can I move here to shoot at that unit and get the heavy flamers over here?
Yeah.
So those kind of movements are really important also because that's like, okay, well, if I move here, let's say that I move really far off to the left because I want to kill this unit on the opponent's opposite side. What about the next turn?
Yeah.
Am I gonna have range to another unit,
Yeah.
or am I going to be moving myself into a position where I'm going to get one really great shot and then I'm spending 2 turns trying to get back?
Yeah, but your threat range is literally 32 inches. That's locked into your mind. And that's actually that's not that far.
No.
That's
No.
that's actually that's a very short threat range.
Yeah,
for
it's the
a
biggest
shooting
issue
unit.
with the model.
Yeah. Which is it's also the biggest sort of it's the balancing part of it, right?
Oh,
They've
yeah,
got
absolutely.
horrific firepower within 24 inches, but outside of that, not so much. So you're thinking that Leviathan, how can I move this thing into threat range
Yes.
against the targets that I want to shoot at? That's
Yes.
your first thing you think about moving, but also you have all those supporting units around it to ensure that it survives.
Yes.
So you're trying to stop an opponent from killing your Leviathan by these other sort of these secondary units.
Yeah.
Like,
When I'm moving a Leviathan or I'm thinking about moving that Leviathan, I have 3 questions, really. Where am I going to move to so that I get range on something? How am I going to move my screen to protect that Leviathan from things I want to charge it or tie it up?
Yep.
And 3, how am I going to move it in a position where it still picks up the buffs and the buffs themselves are still within threat range of something that they want to shoot?
Yeah.
So it's very much a multi-piece moving where, it seems really simple. Oh, move into range, shoot stuff. Well, if I'm doing that, I'm going to be, that's unmotivated. No, not unmotivated. I have a reason. It's not planning ahead.
Yeah.
Right. I need to plan ahead. I need to be thinking about it.
And it's also really easy to be sloppy because once you start moving units, you may have deployed them perfectly, but once you start deploying them or moving them, you might leave a gap in your screen or you might leave certain things in play that people can kind of rush through.
Yeah, or I might move that Leviathan in the way, and suddenly my guardsmen have to go around a Leviathan base,
which is
massive.
Yeah, that was dumb.
Yeah, right. Oh, well, I just cut 5 inches off my move.
Yeah, that's bad. So moving into threat range, your threat range is basically, if it's a shooting unit, it's your movement plus your range of your shooting weapons.
Yep.
Or it's your movement plus your effective charge. Now, some units have, especially even melee units, I don't know, Kraken Gene Stealers. A melee unit is it's moving and it's charge range, but it's also not just a movement, but if it can be warp time, so it moves twice, or quickened, it moves twice.
Yeah.
Can it advance and charge like a Harlequin? Then it's the advance move plus the charge range.
Yes.
So the threat ranges can vary a lot, and that's the one thing you want to look at is don't be surprised by your opponent's threat ranges.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
That's why it always kind of perks my eyebrow when I see like shooting armies kind of move up when they're facing something like, I don't know, like Bloodletters or Space Wolf, Thunderwolf Cavalry. They still exist somewhere.
Yeah,
but
they do.
Somebody's playing them.
Yeah. Why are you moving forward against an army that is moving forward to you
Exactly,
type thing?
yeah.
So you just kind of made their job easier, especially if you went first. Especially if you went first, it gives them more options. I would put another bullet point on here of a purpose of movement to be to kill a unit or stand somewhere or prevent your opponent from standing somewhere or prevent them from killing something of yours. Movement to make your opponent play in different ways is really effective. So, for example, if you had like a World Eater Helldrake, right? Those things move really, really ridiculously fast.
Yep.
And people don't expect them to be able to charge after it.
Yeah.
And it's really nerve-wracking for those things to get up in your grill.
Yeah.
They also have that 24-inch strat where they can just shut off a psychic power, right?
Yeah.
And that is like, Magnus harnesses this on a 15. World Eater's like, I don't care.
4+, hey, look, I denied.
On a 4+, I deny it.
Yeah. Disruptors. You're disrupting something.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
I have a flyer that goes way into your backfield so that I can get behind enemy lines as one of my secondaries.
Yeah.
And then you have to deal with it.
Yeah, you have forced your opponent to deal with something that was not part of their game plan that they did not want to do. Yeah. So that's a very effective part of movement.
The disruptor force there
is dictating kind of the way, dictating your opponent's target priority or what they have to do or how they have to move. Because that Helldrake, they're going to have to move outside 24 because there's some armies that only work on if certain psychic powers go off, and if one of those psychic powers can be shut off, it's going to be a frowny face day.
Yeah, and there's two that can do that. One is Graya from Admech, if it's there's 3. So then the World Eaters has one, and then what's
Black Templars?
Oh, the Black Templars.
I guess there's 4. Sisters can do it.
Sisters can do it.
Sisters can
there's
do
4 of them.
Those are incredibly powerful.
Yeah, they're so
on a 4-up, and typically the 4-up never works. So it's a reroll, but it's a pretty good chance. But you can shut a power down, and that's obnoxious because then they have to deal with that stupid.
If you can shut down like a warp time or like a 3-up invul on Magnus or Doom. I mean, if you can shut down something like that.
Yeah, it's good.
Turning off Death Axe.
Yeah.
Ooh, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's good. The disruptor is another reason for moving. That's the whole purpose of having that. So you mentioned something, Matt, about oftentimes a shooting army. You want to move into the edge of your threat range, but you don't need to. You don't need to keep going. You just move to where you get to the point where you can shoot, and that's it. You don't need to keep moving forward. There's no the game does not require you to move forward, even though it looks like it should. It doesn't. You don't need to keep going forward. So if you know your opponent's coming to you, or even if it's just going to stand there, you can move the edge of your threat range if you're a shooting unit. And unless you have a reason to be somewhere next turn or the turn after, you can stop and just fire. That's it. There's no reason to keep going unless you really have a reason to, like in future turns.
Yeah, don't be unmotivated in your movement.
Yeah.
Do you have a reason for taking your 18-inch gun to 12?
Yeah.
Well, no, and if it doesn't give you a benefit, don't do it.
Well, and so playing with 3 knights is interesting, is I actually feel I have to be much more careful with them than I ever thought I would need to be with these big things, tough things called knights, because there's a lot of things that can kill a knight in one turn. A lot of things that can kill a knight.
Yes.
Usually an assault. So if I rush forward with a knight thinking it's going to be this awesome thing, I get assaulted and he dies. Well, that was a big fat waste of time. So I can hold back, deal with some threats at range, then move forward if I'm running Crusaders, for example. But there's no reason to rush something up there just for the heck of it.
Well, and another issue that knights have is that you can kind of pull them away from where they should be.
Yeah.
You can kind of lead them on a nice little merry chase, and sure, they move 12 inches, but if they get out of position because you're kind of chasing something that you really shouldn't be, it's going to be hard for you to get back, and you don't have a lot of models to make up for the fact that, if a knight's out of position, that's a good section of your list. That's, almost a quarter of your list out of position right there.
Yeah, you don't want to be chasing things. When you're chasing something, you're like, this is just, I'm not going to catch this. I don't know what I'm doing here. Like you're chasing a unit around a building or something.
Or even if you catch it, then you go, okay, well now next turn I'm not going to be able to use my assault.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
That was silly.
Yeah.
And then, when you're moving into threat range, does this put me somewhere I don't want to be? Do I need to be standing somewhere else? And then it's just a question to ask. I mean, if you are moving into a threat range, am I pulling myself out of range of my supporting units? Am I bombing a unit all the way up the board and it's just going to die? And that case, like, what was the point of that? Like, if an unsupported unit is usually a unit that dies really quickly. So, and then, standing somewhere, taking up board space, capturing objective is a super key element of this edition. And I think one of the most valuable things in this edition is just wounds. Just a single wound is worth quite a bit because a wound is something that somebody has to kill. There's no spillover of wounds like there is in Age of Sigmar. So, lots of bodies in this edition really are valuable because you take up space. And even if they're easy to kill, it's just still something that somebody has to devote firepower to killing.
Yep. You're forcing them to make an investment to get that table space back.
Yeah. Yeah. So taking up space.
Yeah. And if you have a lot of bodies that are very durable, plague bearers, things like that.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's why we see plague bearers everywhere.
Yeah.
Yes.
The 2 units of 30 plague bearers is obnoxious.
It's silly.
Obnoxious.
They're native neg 1 to hit if they're over 20. You can make that an additional neg 1 to hit with miasma, and you can give another one of them warp surge to give them a 4-up invul.
Yep.
So that's a 4-up invul and a 5-up feel no pain, and -1 or neg 2 to hit.
Yep. Brutal. Yep.
And they just say, "This is my section of the table. Don't come near it."
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing with plague bearers is their movement. I mean, you can advance them because you're not really going to do much with them first 2 turns, but you draw little patterns, and the whole point of they are there for screening, taking up space, but also protecting the characters behind them that do all the work.
I just imagine a Nurgle player drawing designs with their plague bearers, like, I made a queue, with all these plague
A
bearers.
little heart shape with the plague bearers.
It's a pony.
Yeah. Movement with purpose. Well, I just really wanted to make a heart, Plague bearers, movement with purpose, okay?
So stopping an opponent from killing you is moving out of threat range, and like, for example, moving into a ruin or building or moving up a level. Moving into buildings are one of the best ways to stop an opponent from killing you because you're moving out of line of sight.
Yes.
So hiding behind things. So like, Matt, when you would run the Shining Spears, the Yunari, you would move them in such a spot where they were out of line of sight so they couldn't get shot. And then if you failed some power, they wouldn't be strung out there all by themselves.
Yep.
So moving somewhere to prevent an opponent from killing you is not just moving out of threat range, but also moving out of line of sight. So,
I mean, that kind of goes back to measuring very carefully. So when I failed to kill this knight, but But hey, if I have something right here that I can soul burst off of and shoot, zoop back behind a piece of line of sight blocking terrain, I mean, I might lose one or two spears, but I'm not gonna lose them all because that's a major cog of that army, or was.
Yeah.
Rest in peace.
The problem with this, though, is it's stopping an opponent from killing you. Sometimes you get hung up on trying to keep things alive when they should be moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I played a Tyranid player at LVO, and he had 2 units of Gene Stealers, which they were cracking Gene Stealers. They move really fast.
Terrifying.
He had 1 unit of Gene Stealers kind of rush up. The other unit he kind of hid back, or he had off to the side on an objective. And I thought to myself, well, that's weird. Why? That's unpurposeful movement. Those Gene Stealers are not objective sitters. They are get in your face and kill stuff.
Yeah.
I won the game, but part of it's like, I think those Gene Stealers should have been up in my face because I was really worried. I had all my breachers kind of, I'm like, okay, I got things to catch these guys. They'll die, but that's okay. That's what they're there for. And he only ran one of them at him. So I'm like, all right, okay. That's moving without a purpose. That's holding something back when it should be moving forward. So, yeah.
Gene Stealers don't like to sit around on objectives.
No, they're not.
They get antsy.
They get antsy. Yeah.
They are bred for moving forward and killing.
Yep. And I think that's why sometimes when you look at building a list, it's nice to have units that just don't do anything except sit there. Cheap units, you can put on an objective, whatever, they're there. They can hide in a building if they're infantry, and they're just there for that.
Rippers.
So,
Rippers are great objective sitters.
That's what they do. Nurglings are the best.
Are the best objective sitters.
Yep. Cheap. Now, let's talk about move blocking. This is stopping your opponent from standing somewhere. This is preventing your opponent from moving, preventing your opponent from deep striking, screens, bubble wraps. We've all heard all the different kinds of things, but in general, what it is move blocking. You're stopping somebody from moving somewhere. Now, Sean, talk about screens. When you're looking and setting up your screens, because you have a lot of fire units that are supported, whether it's the Leviathan or your Dark Talons that kind of move forward, however you've done your different combinations, but you have used screens.
Yes.
What is the purpose of a screen for your army? Guard screens.
Yeah, so the big thing about a screen is I'm looking at the models that my opponent is going to want to tie up or kill in assault. And I go, to get to that model, where is he going to need to stand at the end of his movement phase to get there?
Yeah.
And so then with that understanding of, okay, he's going to need to move this direction. If I move a unit into that spot or even past that spot is really ideal.
Yep.
Well, if they don't have fly, they can't move past me.
Yeah.
I mean, I do this against knights all the time. Oh, hey, look, Mr. Knight, I'm going to move up, guard squad 3.25 inches away from you.
Yeah.
Go ahead and kill him. You're going to shoot him. You're going to stomp him. I don't care. Do what you're going to do, but you do not get to move your 12 inches towards me.
Yeah.
And so you need to do it properly, you need to identify, oh, hey, where are they going to need to be? How do I stop them from getting there?
Yeah.
And the big thing about screens is you don't want your screens to be really, really close to your units a lot of the time because they can bounce off your screens. If if they're just trying to tie up my Leviathan, well, if my guardsmen are just standing,
right in front of
my Leviathan, they go, okay, well, I kill your guardsmen, then I pile into your Leviathan.
Yeah.
Good job. Your screen actually gave me an easier charge to tie
typically,
you up.
what's the distance between the edge of the unit in front of your screening unit and the one ball, assuming not a 6-inch consolidation, because some things can consolidate 6 inches.
Like if they're not hormagaunts or something, I mean, it's going to be 4 inches.
4 inches,
or more, just so that he can't pile into close combat range.
Yeah,
because then I'm forced to fall back.
And not only that, too, let's talk about like against Gene Stealers, for example.
Yes.
Because Gene Stealers are easy because they don't have fly; they move on the ground, or a Night for that matter.
Yes.
But Gene Stealers, if you're setting your screen up correctly, your individual models are close enough. So that they can't move past your screen.
Yes.
To trap your guys.
Yeah. So the thing about if you do a 2-inch coherency with your screen, they're not going to be able to move through them in the movement phase because that base is still going to get within an inch.
Yeah.
The issue is when they charge.
Yeah.
Because then they go, okay, well, I'm going to charge, and then they just charge straight through your unit.
Yeah.
Right? And they go all the way towards where they want to be.
Yeah.
And then they fight, and then they pile in.
Yeah.
So, you do need to make sure that you're denying their base size from being able to just fit through your screen.
Yeah. And
you don't want to have a porous screen in that case.
But against the Knight, it doesn't matter because the Knight's base
it's massive.
It's just massive. Yeah. So that's a screen. And then there's also just moving or preventing things from deep striking. And I think the worst thing you can do is leave your back lines undefended, especially if because you start the game, you're facing off against your opponent they come to you. You're basically looking at each other. Now, if you leave a spot behind you, your opponent basically goes, "Oh, I have another front to do things with." Like, so if you leave a spot for, I don't know, 30 orc boys to come down behind you, then you're sort of like sandwiched in between things, and then you have to move backwards when you really want to move forward. So screening things out is basically making sure that within 9 inches, the board edges in the back. Now sometimes you don't care. Maybe your whole army moves forward, but making sure in the back there's within 9 inches of all the edges of the board, so that there's no unit can deep strike down behind it.
Yeah. Now blocking out 30 orc boys is not super hard.
That's massive.
It's a big footprint.
No,
blocking out like a big unit of like bloodletters or pink horrors, not terribly difficult. Yep. There are things.
The Blood Angel Smash Captain.
The Smash Captain may be in the top 10 list. There's things that are way worse that are around. The Calidus is terrifying.
Oh yeah,
because you don't have to block out 9 inches. You have to block out 4. Yeah. Or conservatively, if you want to be real conservative, you need to block out at least 5.
Yeah.
You know. Yep. You know, because the Calidus comes in, it deep strikes down 3 inches plus D6. So you can have a Calidus that drops in 4 inches away from your stuff.
Yep.
And the Calidus will wreck characters left and right.
Especially, God, Eldar characters.
Speaking of character killers, the Kellermorph.
The Kellermorph is another one.
Within 3.
Who can come in within 3 inches, who is a nightmare.
And what's the range of the Kellermorph? With his guns?
His guns, I think it's 12.
It's 12, so you have to block things off like 15 inches away.
Yeah.
It's pretty silly. Yep. So this is it's a major disruption when you have one of those in your army, because it makes the opponent just completely change how they're doing things. If they don't, then they're kind of right where you want them to be.
Yeah. And those units are disruptors. That's for sure. Yeah.
And they're cheap. They're super, super cheap.
The Kellermorph is just ridiculous.
The investment is in the CP to do it, but it's worth it.
Yeah. So that's a good point. I guess when you're talking about move blocking, you have to know what you are move blocking. So what are the things your opponent can do as far as deep striking, and then movement, and then what has fly, and those kinds of things are really the important things you're going to look for. Yep. You just basically, because every unit has to be outside of an inch. You have that going for you. And I don't know, I like to have everything in front of me. So I try to leave as much stuff in the back to sort of prevent things from deep striking down. But you're right. Some of those things, like a Kellermorph or a Calidus, it's just so restrictive. You have to keep so much of your army back to hold back that board space.
A lot. And things like Morty and Magnus. Yep. Those ones are really tricky because they move so far with fly on their own, and then they can be warp timed to do that again.
Yep.
Move blocking them is substantially more difficult.
Yeah, it helps.
Not all armies can do it.
It helps when you have bodies. So, Mortarion, he can move 12 inches, and so if you could get units within, say, 10 inches of him, just cheap units, and he can't land on the back side of that blob of units, then you pushed him back like to about 8 inches.
With Morty, if you can move block him that way, if you can, get within 10 inches of him, that gives him like a 8-inch movement, or less, can be less. And you get another unit, within another 10 inches of that first blocking unit. Yep. You've got him down from 24-inch movement to like 16 or lower. Yeah. And that's a huge hit to his ability to get up into your face turn.
Yeah. But it requires you to understand, here's where he wants to go, or here's where he can go, and then denying that. Knights are easy because they can move on the ground, but move blocking, the best move blocking is, where does this person want to put their model? I'm going to put a model there. Yep. And that's just it. Yep. That's really the essence of it. And you can push some units back. So 30 orc boys with the jump, they're not usually going to jump in your back lines, although I have seen you do that, and part of me is like, that player really did not screen out their back very well.
Mistakes were made.
The Smash Captain, I think, is one of the trickier ones because it's a tiny little model on a 32 millimeter base that honestly, it's almost impossible to sort of move block that.
It's very difficult. It's very easy to miss a spot when doing that.
Oh, yeah.
Because I have done that. I have missed a small spot and it wrecked me.
Yep.
I had a Smash Captain land on top of a building, and then I went,
Of course, it can go on top of the building. Yeah, that's true. Even on that, you have to watch for the buildings.
On top of a ruin, sorry.
But you have to watch for ruins for sure.
Vertical distance. Move blocking as well.
That's why Smash Captains were so good. And that's why when they originally did the FAQ that you couldn't charge over models, that was a big deal. Now you can with units with fly.
Yeah.
Units with fly can now charge over models. They brought that back because before that really shut stuff down because it just made it that much easier to move block.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, move blocking in its essence. Where do they want to go? Put some unit there to prevent them from going there. And that is why cheap bodies are so powerful. That's why people that really know how to run guard well use those guardsmen to do things. They are super useful tools.
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
have just bodies that do things. All right. Now, let's talk about planning ahead. Now, movement is a phase, but often, you're not going where you want to go in a single turn. When you think 2 turns ahead, it's usually talking about movement. So you need to consider sort of your movement path over several turns and make sure you're not kind of putting yourself out of position. So with a knight, I might go, okay, I'm going to hold back. I've got some threats, turn 1, maybe turn 2, and then I'm going to move along these paths. But literally, my paths are kind of set where the buildings are set. So I know where I can go and where I can't go.
Yeah,
like
where
my
do you
movement
physically
path is
fit?
there.
Yeah.
Flyers have certain movement paths as well. Eldar flyers really don't have. They can go wherever the hell they want, really. but you have certain movement paths that you want to go. And when you think about where you want to be and don't put yourself out of position. So, for example, you have 30 plague bearers and you're screening for characters. Typically, you have 60 plague bearers, let's be honest.
Yeah.
Those things, you do not want to move them out of position. If they are trying to screen against assault units, you want to make sure that things can't move through those. And where they want to be turns 2, turns 3. How do you want to move your screen around? Because it's all moving together as one chunk. And you have to sort of make sure that you're kind of going in that same chunk. You're not just moving them just for the heck of it.
And every inch of mismovement is 2 inches of movement lost. Because you wasted that movement on the turn that you mismoved, and then you're going to waste that movement again trying to make up for it on the next turn. So if you have plague bearers, they're slow. How are they going to keep up with your characters to continue to screen your characters? If you don't do it right, your characters are now slowed to a crawl. And now suddenly they're struggling with psychic power ranges. There's a lot of times where plague bearer movement will slow down demon princes enough that they go to smite, and I'm like, well, you don't really have anything in range. That kind of stuff. Because imprecise movement or mismovement slowed them down.
Yeah, like Bulgrins or Grotesques, they want to be in the middle of the board typically. Not always, but they want to be toward the middle because honestly, when you think about movement, if you're on one side of the board or the other, there's just that much more movement you have to make up. The middle is kind of where you have the most options. So like in the middle of your deployment zone, you have the most options to go left, right, or front. And so if you move to the middle of the board, you have the most options to holding. And usually there's an objective or something in the middle that's kind of important. But you want to move your Bulgrins and Grotesques or bully unit to claim board space. And that's usually where they want to be. Typically. Mechanized infantry. We're seeing this now with the Castellan now gone. And chimeras. I'm actually hearing people run chimeras. How are chimeras typically? What is the sort of the movement with chimeras that usually have squads inside?
Yeah, so with the new, well, not super new at this point, but with the Vigilist detachment, it has a really fun part where you can hop out of the chimera and shoot.
Oh, nice.
Hop out at the end of the movement.
Yeah. So
that becomes a really fun case of like, okay, well, here's the movement of my chimera, and then, here's the range of the deployment and the shooting. So when we're looking at movement, make sure that you're including, especially if you're looking at an enemy's threat range, if they move to transport up and they have a close combat unit inside, they have 3 inches to deploy plus their base size, so and then their movement, and then their charge. Make sure you're doing all that math.
It's close to 4 almost by the time they get out of that transport. That top one,
or larger if it's a 40 millimeter or something like that. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So pay attention to those movements, and then also with transports, it's a case of, okay, if I drop my units here, is the transport in a position where it can be useful after that? Like one of the values of rhinos that was actually brought up by some skilled players, even when they weren't in the meta, was that, that rhino can be a disruption. Go charge an infantry unit with a rhino. Hey, look, your infantry unit can't kill a rhino very easily, and I don't care if it dies anyways.
Yeah, you're soaking the Overwatch, and not only that, you're preventing that infantry from moving. You're literally move blocking them.
Yes.
Because you've trapped it in combat. Yeah.
They're great for eating Overwatch.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what Harlequin Skyweavers are. Yeah. No, Starweavers.
Starweavers. Transports,
Starweavers are really good at because they're neg one to hit. All around. And Yeah, they eat Overwatch for the squishy T3 elves to charge in.
Yep, absolutely. Wave serpents are really good at it too.
And wave serpents are just obnoxious because they can literally sit there and they can soak way too much firepower. An empty wave serpent is a really valuable tool.
Oh yeah,
because you're moving it in places where you want it to be, and they make great engineers because they can just sit there.
There are so many games where I have to consider, how do I keep that wave serpent from touching my Leviathan?
Yeah.
How do I do that?
Yeah, because it just has to touch something and shuts it down. Yeah, for sure. Now let's talk about the movement types and the unit types and movement. So characters under 10 wounds, they can't be targeted, but you need to keep units in place to screen against shooting or melee, especially behind you. I was playing a newer player, and I had a deep striking unit, and he had his demon prince, but he had all of his he was playing Slanesh, and he had all of his stuff forward, but he left a spot where his demon prince was, and so I dropped down a unit of infiltrators. And he goes, "Oh, well, that's not my warlord. Do you still want to do that?" I'm like, "Yeah, I want to do that."
Yes, I wanted to.
And later on, he goes, "I probably should have left like 10 demonettes behind." Well, I'm like, "Yeah, you should have.
Definitely.
You should have." The characters should have bodyguards around them at all times, and if they're snipers, you need to keep those guys safe constantly.
Did you have old school or something?
No, I just like he left an exposed demon prince, and
it's
easy to kill.
He must be coming back from an older edition because like that's not my warlord. Are you worried about that? Like I really don't care about warlord nearly as much.
I'm moving one of your big tools.
Yeah, he's coming from an old edition, so it's good. Yeah. It's good too to get newer players kind of into this edition because now everything is an individual unit. You don't join units anymore, so characters are much more. We all learned when we started, but they are vulnerable.
Yes.
And so you want to make sure that you can't have somebody just deep strike down and kill them or shoot them. And then the Kellamorph, he is a sniper, is he not?
Yes, he does.
So you need that 12 inches way out to
or be in a building and then make sure that it can't enclose ruin and then make sure that it can't deep strike into the ruin with you.
Yeah.
And something to say about screens, just because you have a unit in front of them at the end of your turn doesn't mean that unit will still be alive halfway through their shooting.
That is a good point.
When you were looking at screens like this happened with Mike yesterday, he screened out some of his characters with guardsmen, and then I moved up some anti-tank, anti-infantry, killed the guardsmen, and then I had a shot at the characters.
Yep.
I timed it correctly that the screen, it forced me to invest some shots there.
Sure.
But I was still able to get to the character.
Yeah.
So don't feel like, oh, hey, I'm playing against something, move 10 guardsmen in front of all my characters. I'm fine. He can't shoot me anymore. Well, as soon as those guardsmen are dead, he can shoot you.
Yeah, screens do have to last a shooting phase.
Yeah.
Otherwise, and also, if your screen drops, and maybe you have that second backup screen, you may have to keep rebuilding your screen turn after turn, especially so that your characters are not killed, because characters are usually very important to your army. They're doing lots of stuff for you, so snipers are really, they didn't used to be, but I think with the Vindicare, snipers are kind of coming back. I don't know why, but they're dangerous now. Yeah. There's more snipers you see in the game.
The Vindicare, the Kellamorph is a huge disruption. The Tau sniper drones are coming back. There's ways of buffing them to make them pretty effective. Yeah, snipers are becoming more of a thing.
Yeah. I think you'll see eliminators a little bit, or maybe a little bit too expensive.
They're a bit expensive, but they're cool.
Because you only take them in units of 3.
Yeah. They're 72 points for 3.
It's
a lot for a troop. Are they troop?
No, they're heavy support.
That's a lot for 3 models.
It's a lot.
If it was 5, 75 points for 5.
But they pair well with the Vindicare.
Yeah.
Is why you might see them.
Yeah. So like the snipers for AdMech are the same. They can kind of do that as well. Because the Vindicare often doesn't always kill it. You have to get pretty lucky on your rolls to kill something, but if you can take a couple wounds off first, he's a great way to finish him off.
Yep.
Infantry have the benefit of walking through walls, so they have the ultimate flexibility like we talked about. You can hide in buildings or ruins. When you're thinking of moving with infantry, if you can help it, it's nice to just move building to building or ruin to ruin or cover to cover. Unless you're really trying to clear out space and you need to have lines of infantry, I like to hide them as much as I can, especially if you're dealing with elite infantry.
Yep.
One of the things is if you're in a building or a ruin, you should get in the habit of always staying 1 inch away from the walls because something can assault you like a knight, because a knight can't go in a ruin, but if he touches the edge of the wall and you're within an inch, you're in combat.
Yep.
So make sure that you're staying 1 inch away from the walls. When you're looking at infantry and you're planning out your movement, you can look to the buildings to say, okay, here's where my infantry, kind of like the path of movement that I can do with these infantry units.
Yeah.
Now, vehicles or bikes without fly are the most restricted, and I think this is we don't see Space Marine bikes probably because they're not as vicious, but they're just so limited.
Yeah.
They can't do nearly as much as they used to be able to. Have you run Ravenwing at all? And this
little bit.
Well,
yeah.
This feels like the movement limitations would be brutal on those.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, Dark Angels can do it a little bit better because we can advance, shoot, and charge in the same turn with the strat. It really comes down to the bikes aren't that competitive anyways.
Yeah.
Well, they're too expensive for what they do.
They're expensive. Yeah.
Where you will see bikes in a Space Marine army.
Scout bikes.
You ready for an edge case?
Yeah.
Okay. Death Watch runs bikes because they're good, but also because they can get them the infantry.
Yes, that's right.
If you have a veteran squad that you put 5 bikes in and then you combat squad, those bikes keep the infantry keyword.
That's crazy town, but
They actually lose the bike keyword.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay.
Which they're not sad about. You don't get anything from the bike keyword.
No, you don't care at all.
You get a lot from the infantry keyword.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's the bikes with or bikes with fly. That's why bikes with fly, like Eldar bikes or things like that. Or
very useful. But I mean, I'm trying to think of what bikes without fly that you see on the table right now. You can see some orc bikers.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Orc bikers will show up. The jackals for Gene Stealer Cult. I have seen a few lists using jackals. But yeah, they're tricky to use. Yeah, because also they don't have the benefit of infantry getting cover just by touching cover. Yeah, they actually have to be obscured by it. So it's hard because then you have to move behind cover, but then you don't get to ignore the thing that you're moving behind to move through it. So you have to then move around it. So yeah, they're pretty limited.
In vehicles without fly, like a knight, for example, it's tall enough, or any model like that, it's tall enough that it can see through things, and it's not super restricted. Yeah. Leviathan, though, it has a lot of firepower, but as I'm sitting here thinking about it, there's a lot of restrictions on the Leviathan. Oh yeah, because it is a vehicle.
Yeah, it's a little bit difficult to
go in things, and I'm thinking of like the AdMech robots, the Dakabots, the Castellan robots. Yeah. They're limited as well because they can't go through ruins. I'd have to move around. They're basically like a Leviathan in that respect. Yeah. So I have to be very careful.
I use a lot of movement having to walk sideways around things.
Sideways, yeah. It's a waste. And then flyers, of course, the thing with Eldar flyers is interesting is they can go back and forth in a line. So I'm facing you and I can literally go basically side to side.
What about vehicles and bikes with fly? We talked about vehicle and bikes without fly.
Oh, yeah.
Vehicle and bikes with fly.
Vehicles and bikes with fly.
And you see them everywhere. I mean, Custode bikes, their jet bikes are still super good.
Oh, yeah.
For multiple reasons. And Shining Spears are, they were pretty good.
They had their day. If they drop in points, they're still... The thing about Shining Spears, though, just as a thought too, even if they drop back and they became just a cool craft world unit, they move forward, they do their thing, they're completely unsupported. There's nothing out there with them, and they're just a suicide unit at that point.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah. And vehicles with fly, I mean, Wave Serpents are great. We all know the Custode tanks are great because they can fly. Things with hover, they can go up on buildings, or even Venoms and Ravagers. I mean, they're great. Yeah. They can't be locked down in combat. I mean, they can just fly out and still shoot.
Does the Repulsor tank have fly? The Space Marine Primaris tank?
Yeah, it does indeed.
Really? That big brick can go on.
Yeah, it's got repulsors, man. Crank them up to 100.
It's actually kind of useful for it.
Well, yeah, and the big thing about that is, especially if it's a shooting vehicle, you can use verticality to get line of sight. Yeah. Deny cover, get line of sight. It's very, very useful.
That's why fly is such a powerful keyword in this edition. Yeah. It's really, really powerful.
If I could strap a bunch of thrusters to a Leviathan.
Yeah.
Let me do it.
Well, isn't there a 30k
a Contemptor that flies, yeah.
So but the Eldar flyers, what's interesting is somebody told me, because you can pivot 90 degrees, you can move and then pivot again. So essentially you can do a side to side movement with an Eldar flyer.
It works for Crimson Hunters. It does not work for Hemlocks for multiple reasons.
Well, Hemlocks want to be closer.
Hemlocks want to be closer because they only have a 16-inch range gun and they want to be up close to psychic power, something, smite, something. So the Hemlocks are usually up in the face. Those Crimson Hunters, absolutely. Those Crimson Hunters are great bubble wrap because, turns 1 through 3, they can just boop, turn 90 degrees, go to the other side of the deployment zone and then turn 90 degrees again, and the Crimson Hunter that you had in the other spot does the exact. So they just swap places.
Swap.
And they're great bubble wrap.
And so that's a good point to bring up, that in the FAQ, the last FAQ, they said that you can move through flyer bases as long as you don't end your movement on 1 inches. But a 30 unit of Orc Boys or a unit of Gene Stealers has a lot of models to use. You're not going to clear the flyer base unless you started your turn right at the edge of it. I still think it's still really good for just blocking it.
Part of that FAQ, you can end within an inch of a flyer base.
You can end within an inch. You just can't end on top of it.
Oh, that's right. Sorry. Yes. Sorry. But you still have the big oval base.
To
still contend with.
Absolutely.
So instead of completely preventing a knight from moving, it will just prevent it from moving. It will like knock it down to like 4 inches or something like that. Yeah. So it wasn't that big of a nerf. I think that's pretty universal.
And they still deep strike block.
Yep.
So
that's
still
true.
very useful.
Yes. And if they didn't do any of that, then even a bit better. But they still do. You're right. They still can move block. Not as effective as before, but still pretty. I think still pretty effective. So, standard flyers. Standard flyers is funny because when I first started playing too, it's like, how do I fly these darn things? You kind of do more of a rectangle or a square pattern, because you pivot, you move, you pivot, you move, but you have to sort of make sure that you're not taking yourself off the board. So oftentimes like the diamond pattern is like, I pivot, I move, I pivot, I move. You're kind of going around in a circle. Otherwise you're going to go off the board.
They're making a left turn.
Yeah.
They're all former NASCAR.
I mean, the best way of doing that to kind of give yourself some more movement, at least for the first couple turns, is we all want to play some forward. Go towards the enemy. You want to play some sideways. So that way they can go 90 degrees, then go forward.
They have the entire range of the 90 degree turn to go.
Yes. So that way they can kind of stay where they want to be a little bit more in turn 2.
Yeah, for sure. And then those are units you have to really try to be very careful about movement. And so, like, I played a mixed flyer list with Dark Eldar flyers and Eldar flyers, Craft World. It's really weird because the Dark Eldar flyers feel so clumsy because you actually have to actually pay attention to the movement versus Craft World, which you're like, I'll just do whatever I want to do with this thing.
Privilege is showing.
Yes, for sure. Now, Imperial flyers, though, have hover, which is always a ticket out of a tough situation. So you can put yourself into really tough situations and go, I switched to hover.
Very useful. I use it a good amount. Advance, drop a bomb, be in a position where otherwise I would die, and then hover and advance back out and use the strat to shoot.
Now, does that Custodes Orion, that massive Lord of War flyer, does it have hover?
Of course.
It does.
Oh my gosh.
Of course it does.
That thing. Huh.
They made it T8 with like 22 wounds.
It's 20, a flying knight.
24
it's a -1 to hit flying knight.
It's a -1 to hit.
Why wouldn't they give it hover too?
Why not?
Why not?
And let's be honest, it's -2 because they have another -1 that they can put on it.
Banner.
Yep.
Oh boy. Yeah. Well, this might be the interesting meta for this summer. All right. So let's take a break. Let's hear a word from our sponsor, Trader A. If you're like most Warhammer players, you own a ton of models. At one time, you had big plans for these models, but now they just kind of sit, gathering dust, unused and unloved. It's time to clean out your closet of shame. Visit TraderA.com and get cash for your used models. Trader A is run by Captain A, someone who's been in the community a long time and has done a lot to grow the hobby. He's also a personal friend of the show. Unopened boxes, models on a sprue, half-built models, primed, painted, even bits have value. The process is simple. Send him a list of what you have. He'll send you a quote. You pack it up, send in your stuff, and he'll get you cash. You can shop around, but you're going to find that Trader A gives you 40% more than the other guys. You want it quick? You want to get rid of it? Visit TraderA.com. Get cash to buy the stuff that you really want. TraderA.com. Sell your models and get your cash quick and easy. All right, and we're back. So let's talk about the idea of when you're moving, you're not moving a single unit, you're moving in groups of units. So Sean, you kind of mentioned at the very beginning where you're not moving just your Leviathan, you're moving all the stuff that supports the Leviathan, all the stuff that protects the Leviathan. There's all the little pieces and parts you're moving in play in order to make sure that the Leviathan can do what it does. So you're not necessarily moving a single unit. You're moving all the pieces and parts to support it, and it could be a direct support like an aura buff or psychics. It could also just be indirect like a counter charge or a screen or things like that to kind of keep it safe. But oftentimes units move with other units.
So in those rare circumstances when you see a Tau army move, they
Turn 3 and 4.
They have to keep this in mind above all else because they have such short ranges on things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Savior protocols with the drones is 3 inches.
That's so, yeah.
So their supporting fire for the greater good is relatively short range too. They really have to keep this in mind when they're moving, and that's why they move like a block.
Yeah.
They might as well just put them all on a giant movement tray.
Yeah.
They all move together because they all kind of hang out together.
Yeah. And in the trick for Tau, especially the classic gunline castle Tau, is they shoot everything. They have about 2 turns to neutralize all the threats. Then by turn 3 is 4. They have to start moving out after that. And so Tau have it's not even just planning your movement out like a couple turns ahead. It's like, what am I doing this turn? When do I start to move? You don't want to leave yourself, you basically want to be to where you need to be by the end of the game. You can run out of game turns real quick because there's only 6 of them for standard ITC missions. So Tau usually will shoot, and then hopefully they've cleared enough out so that it doesn't matter as much. But yeah, they need to start moving.
Yep.
Aura buffs and psychic support and things like that, and you can chain these off. So you might have let's talk about Ynnari. Not just because they don't work the same as they used to, but you used to have to do, I got to buff it, and then I'm going to do quicken. The ranges are really, really important for the aura buffs, especially psychic powers. And it's nice to, if you're trying to cast a psychic power, to be out of range of the 24-inch deny.
Yes.
Because why give your opponent the chance to shut something down?
Yep.
So you have to be just in range to debuff a unit, but out of range of a deny. And that's that's why that Helldrake you talked about, the World Eaters, is so disruptive. Because you can't be out of range of that deny. It's just right there.
It moves 30 inches or something.
Yeah,
like
I think close to that.
That's just a genius strategy. But that's a Don Husin.
Oh, I think he uses it for other things because you can still. I don't know if the Bale Flamer is heavy or not.
Yeah.
Is the Bale Flamer heavy?
It's assault.
Yeah, so you can assault those. You can can move up and then advance, and you can just Bale Flamer a bunch of stuff that has been misdeployed a little bit.
I mean, let's give some credit to Joe. He ran 3 of them a year ago.
I was
when they were really bad.
Yeah. And he still did fun things. I mean, I watched him try point models on turn 1.
They were still obnoxious.
Yeah, it was great.
Obnoxious.
It was great.
Huh.
They're obnoxious to paint too, from the looks of it. All the wings with the indents and stuff.
Please no.
Oh man, brutal.
I played against him, and 2 of them exploded in my alliance turn 1. He tri-pointed, or no, he tried to tri-point, couldn't get the tri-point off. I fell back, shot him, and then they exploded. I'm like, well, okay, yeah, you just did a lot of mortals.
The indirect support units like to support each other, and I remember when I was first starting the game, I would use a missile, like a heat-seeking missile, get up there and get into combat, and it would die. But then the rest of my army was behind, and it wasn't hitting at the same time. So oftentimes you want to time your movement to support units, have multiple things attack. So the Orc Boys, it's great. You can get a unit in there, but oftentimes you want 3 units going at the same time. You want to put yourself in a position where the units are all crashing at once, not just one unit that can be dealt with.
Yeah, threat overload. And that's where a Harlequin Solitaire really can come into play, because there's always that Evisor thing, let me at him, let me at him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because the Solitaire can just right up the field, and it's very tempting. I have the rose, and I'm just going to kill whatever I charge into, but hey, I'm going to die really quickly afterwards because I'm still 5 wounds and a T3 elf with a 3-up invul.
Yep.
Timing that to where it arrives the same time as your troops and your Shadow Seer to give -1 to wound towards it. I mean, just kind of timing that sort of movement and that sort of, it doesn't have to be an alpha strike. It can be a beta strike.
Yep.
To where everything kind of comes at once, a threat overload.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
All right. Special rules for movement. These are things you want to pay attention to. Psychic powers.
Yes.
Warp Time is a classic. Quicken for Eldar. There are certain powers that allow units to move, and these are things you definitely want to pay attention to. And obviously, when your opponent's picking their powers, you know right away what each one does. But these are the ones that usually will allow them to either move again or move out of assault or whatever. But Warp Time and Quicken, I think, are the most important ones that I can think through. What are the other?
The Swarm Lords move again is
his ability that he has,
because that one is 100%.
Yeah,
is 100% success.
Better.
It's not a stratagem, so it can't be vected. It's not a psychic power. It can't be denied.
Space Marines have a Warp Time power.
Do they really?
Yeah, it's for Phobos.
Oh.
Phobos armor. Yeah, and the Vigilist detachments with all the Phobos. You can Warp Time a Phobos unit.
That's actually, I don't know why you would. Maybe.
Reavers have the Phobos keyword. You can
If only they had rend on their weapons.
but they have combat knives and scary looking skull masks.
They have rend on their pistols.
Oh, there we go.
As an aside, have you watched the fan-made video Astartes?
Dude, it is
it's
so good.
Have
If you have not seen Astartes,
Uh-huh.
it is, and I'm speaking to the listeners, it is the best depiction of Space Marines ever.
Yep.
Like in visual medium.
It makes you wish Space Marines were the way they are right now in the tabletop. That is such a cool.
Yeah.
Space Marines can be that way against casual gamers, but in competitive play,
And I'm not even talking about like competitiveness or their strength. It is the perfect representation of their skill,
Cold,
their organization,
efficient,
their efficiency,
killers.
their speed.
Yeah.
Like because they're fast.
Yeah.
Space Marines are fast. They're not cumbersome. They're not bulky.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they have so much power behind them.
Yeah.
The sound design is amazing. Yeah. Watch it. It's amazing.
Astartes. I'll put a link to it. But anyways, that's how Space Marines should fight, I think. And so the Reavers should be fighting that way, unfortunately. And they have a skull mask, for gosh sakes.
So, Swarm Lord's really important. The dark matter crystal.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yes,
Dark matter crystal is
Veil of Darkness as well.
The Veil of Darkness. Those are guaranteed. Those are guaranteed, kind of redeploys. To quote unquote, because those things happen automatically.
The jump, of course.
The jump.
Yeah.
Yep. I'd say the jump is something that you'd need to worry about because it's as a high likelihood of going off.
Yes.
A very, very, very high likelihood.
And you're not
of going.
denying it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Warp time, because it's usually cast by Magnus
Or Ahriman.
Ahriman, who get pluses to cast and get a bigger, it's not 6 inches. 'Cause It's usually 6 inches, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So they get 12 inches.
12.
Yeah. They get 12 inches.
They give you sit farther back. Yeah, for
Because
sure.
that was always the thing about warp time is that you needed to be right there.
Yeah.
But then Thousand Suns came out like,
you're
hey,
like,
look at
these
this.
are warp time caddies.
Yep.
So
I would say Quicken is the one you need to worry about the least.
Nowadays, it's not as much.
Yeah.
It failed. I can tell you from firsthand experience, it fails
because it's a
lot.
warlock power, and there's no way to boost a warlock power outside of the Seer Council, and even then, it feels bad.
Another form of extending movement is there are psychic powers that give the ability to advance and charge.
Yeah. Yes. Advanced and charge powers, or stratagems for that matter too.
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
those are the things you sort of need to look for with movement, and you obviously you want to look for it in your own codex as well, but to know a little bit about what other codexes have those.
And ask proactive questions. Ask your opponent, hey, do you have any abilities that allow you to advance and charge? Hey, do you have any abilities that allow you to extend the movement of that unit?
Yeah.
It was one of those cases where Mike yesterday was trying to figure out where exactly Samael could go, and he's measuring 16 inches. It's a scrim, and so we're practicing, and I point out to him, I'm like, hey, don't forget that I can advance and charge if I use that strat, and that'll be 22 inches. Well, that's 6 inches is a big difference.
Yeah.
And if he wasn't thinking about it, he wasn't planning for it.
Yeah.
That would have been...
And he's got an fixed advance, right? 6 inches?
Yeah, absolutely, because he's a skimmer. So without thinking about that, you can put yourself in a really bad position and then get that moment of, oh, that's a feel bad.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think when you're practicing movement too... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, but real quick, with warp time, see... Dark matter crystal and the veil of time. Is it the veil of time or dark shroud?
Veil of darkness.
Veil of darkness.
Veil of darkness. It's one of the
one of those.
Necron thing.
Yeah. Those and even quickening. Those are infantry, and they might be able to do bikes with the veil of darkness. I'm not sure about that. But warp time is different. Warp time, you can do pretty much anything.
Yeah. Yep.
I think you can do anything. Yep. You often see more to get warp timed up.
Yep.
That's pretty standard. But, I've had games where there's like a double butcher cannon, Leviathan, Death Watch Leviathan over there. Your Death Guard, sorry. Death Guard, so much death in this game. Death Guard Leviathan, like, hey, I'm behind this wall. I've measured out, even if he moves his 8 inches, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Okay. And they warp time that Leviathan. I'm like, oh, you can see all of that.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Lovely. So warp time is the one to really watch out for because it can warp time vehicles. They can warp time dreads. They can warp time pretty much anything.
And, of course, Fire and Fade, which we talked about last turn. Fire and Fade gives a 7-inch movement, which is nice. It also prevents you from getting shot. This is the classic Dark Reapers or Wind Riders or bikes. They move up, they shoot, they Fire and Fade back down.
Yeah.
So, now, practicing movement. This is a lot of when you start to learn and practice the game and you get the rules down. This is where really you should be focusing a lot of your energies, is getting your movement down. When you start to play casual games, even just think about the movement. Talk about having a purpose for movement. What is my purpose for moving this unit? How can I move my units in such a way that they're supporting each other? What are those disruptors that he has or that I have that might influence my game plan? But practicing movement is really about setting things up in a way and then moving in such a way that you're basically on guard at all times, especially if you're screening. Yep. But that's really what I think a lot of 40K practice should be about movement, not necessarily rolling dice. It's more about the precision of movement. If you're just shoving stuff forward and trying to shoot, that is fun. But I think the nuance of the game comes in the freedom of movement and actually being precise.
Yeah. So. And if you have a practice buddy, a great practice habit that I've done with Mike and with you is, take a movement phase and then stop. And, if you're playing a game explicitly for both of you to get better, ask your opponent. Yeah. What do you think? You know, and a lot of the times they're going to have a perspective of, well, why did you do this? Yeah. And even if you had a good reason for doing that, them asking you why you did that forces you to express, okay, here's what I was doing. Here's what I was thinking. A lot of times you'll discover things where you're like, oh yeah, you're right. I could have done that differently. Yeah. Or, I could have stayed behind this cover and gotten a better and done the same exact thing.
That was not purposeful movement.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so that, when Mike and I scrim, a lot of the time, 70% of the time is spent in the movement phase. Yeah. Because the rolling dice part's fast. Yeah. That's easy. That's fast. And a lot of the times, if it gets to the end of the game, where we're getting pretty close down to the wire, we'll kind of go, okay, well, let's roll out what matters. Yeah. But the movement is, we're going to be talking about it. We're going to be discussing the choices that we made and where we could go. And, I have these options. What do you think about that? Yeah. So if you have a practice partner, that's a really great way to start identifying habits that you might have that are bad. Yeah. That are very bad.
Yeah, for sure.
I am of the belief that me starting out this game with Dark Eldar is it's helped me out immensely as I've moved on to other armies that actually are not made of paper. Literally made of paper. I would play against Tau players a lot, and so movement was so ridiculously important. And play against Space Wolves is so ridiculously important to stay away from things. Being able to think two or three turns ahead really helps out movement. Yep. And kind of, they say seeing the board, and it was talked about earlier, seeing the board in like a grid. Yeah. If you can kind of break it down a little bit into a grid, not that you necessarily have to, it helps a lot in determining threat ranges and knowing where you need to move things in order to preserve them. Yeah. Because if you're moving something this way, you're making your opponent move something this way. Maybe that makes them, another -1 to hit or something like that. Yeah. Being able to play an army that's fragile, that you need to move and really think forward about moving, will help your overall game. Even if you move on to an army like Custodes that are brick houses. That, it takes my entire army to kill that Terminator. Yeah. Right there, type thing.
Yeah. And I think it's funny watching you play, Matt, is that you're a very good defensive player. So you move just into the threat range and not anymore, and you will work your hardest to ensure that the the fire back is as limited is the least amount possible. You'll take the least amount of shots back. So, and I think playing with Dark Eldar when they were much more fragile before this edition, definitely gives you into that range. And John, playing with infantry, the screening game is kind of what you've really done a good job of sort of being able to move things around to push out your board presence. That's kind of your game plan.
Yeah, and every army has something that it's going to have to work on in practice. You know? For Custodes, they're not going to have to worry about moving to, be less fragile generally, but they do need to worry about the fact that I have all slow units. I need to be moving in a way that my units are going to be useful. And, for a knight player, you're worried about, okay, how do I move to where my knight doesn't get stuck somewhere, move block? All these armies have different considerations. So figure out for your army, what's your weakness in movement? What is your army going to struggle with? And then work on that.
And it boils down to the unit types that are every army has a handful. Every list usually should have about 2 or 3 alpha units, like big units that do something, like that do a lot of the work for you. What are the unit types of those?
Yeah.
And depending on what those unit types are, whether it's a vehicle with fly, a vehicle without fly, infantry unit, whatever, what are the stratagems to support that? That's kind of the limitations of your movement, and like how do you keep these things going? So
that's why we see a lot of the better, quote unquote, air quotes, better armies have some way of getting somewhere quickly. May not have many ways, but they have ways of getting to places quicker. Chaos has warp time. They have the dark matter crystal. Even custodes have fast grab tanks and fast bikes, and they can deep strike down. The only ones that I can think of that don't really have a way of doing that are like AdMech. AdMech well, not yet. They don't have any transports. Right. Space Marines have a rough time with it. I mean, we all know how competitive Space Marines are at this juncture. Even Guard have move.
Which is incredibly useful.
And they have Scions that can drop down. I mean, it's extremely versatile. The better armies tend to have ways of, mitigating poor movement.
Yeah, even Tau have Mon-Ka.
Yeah.
That's actually a very, very powerful ability that they can shift their castle not completely, but they can move it in a chunk to get somewhere to keep firing. So that's actually really powerful for Tau as well. They kind of need it, honestly, because otherwise they just be stuck there. All right, so that's movement. So I think that just to finish our thoughts here, movement is unique to the army and the kind of things you play. You should be practicing, and you should be considering like purposeful movement. What is my purpose for moving, and how do I support this unit in its movement? So thanks for listening to the show. We love to hear from our listeners, so please feel free to message us on Facebook or email us at thebattlehosts@gmail.com. If you'd like to support us, you can help us in a few different ways. You can tell your friends about us and like us on Facebook. You can leave a review on iTunes. You can help, which does help to boost our listening audience. Finally, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/thebattlehosts. For as little as $1 a month, you can help us with the cost of running the show and staying engaged with the community. So, thank you for listening to Battle Hosts.
Remember to be a better gamer
and build a better community.
Good night.
This mic is having ED problems.
Aww.
Gotta just screw it in tighter.
It's what